excited, and thank you so much for coming to join for this talk. I'm going to start with a really quick bit about myself. My name is Sabrina Macpherson, and I am a senior product manager at Morningstar. For those of you who don't know us, we are a FinTech company. We gather and collect a bunch of data insight about investments and portfolios and entities that issue those investments, and then we deliver them to our clients in the form of really powerful product solutions. So I work in product, I work in data, and I work in technology. Also at Morningstar, I've been responsible for leader-led learning, part of a team that helps managers figure out how to deliver on our commitments and our values in their leadership practice. I am also the diversity, equity, inclusion business lead in Canada, and I am the head of out at Morningstar for North America. That's our LGBTQ employee resource group at Morningstar. And as you are about to find out, I am a lover of all things about the human mind and brain. So I'm going to start here with a lightning of the lightning. I'm going to tell you what we're talking about today. Bottom line, successful teams are creative, they're innovative, and they're productive. They're taking risks and they're producing high quality stuff. And you can't get to any of that without deeply engaging with the minds and emotions of your team. So the three animals that you saw in the title of this talk, the lizards and the elephants and the bees, they are my favorite analogies for the three things that you need to know as a leader when you're thinking about the human minds and brains that make up your team. So you need to think about these animals, and I'm going to go through a few of the practices of how we engage with them, how we create an environment of psychological safety, which creates space for vulnerability, which allows you to build a real sense of community and connectedness, and gets to the good stuff, which is the creativity and innovation and productivity that you're after. So we'll start with the lizard. The limbic system in the human brain is what I lovingly call the lizard brain. And I call it this because it's a very basic evolutionary part of our brain. We share it with other animals like lizards and birds and other mammals. And it is the part of our brain responsible for keeping us alive, right? It keeps us eating. If we've reproduced, it keeps us caring for our offspring. And most importantly, it is responsible for our fight, flight, freeze reaction. So when something big and scary jumps at you, dog's coming your way, you have to make a decision on what you're going to do. And the lizard brain, limbic system, kicks up your adrenaline, and logic brain has left the room. You're not able to make higher functioning order decisions here because your brain, your limbic system is screaming at you, get safe, get safe, get safe. What's really interesting in neuroscience research over the last while is it's shown that human brains respond to social and emotional threats the same way that they do to physical ones. So if you think about your workplace, you're not likely to have a dog that's scary jumping at you over the boardroom table, but it's perceiving the social and emotional threat of feeling like, oh, I'm about to walk into a meeting room and my boss is about to name and blame and shame me in front of 20 people whose opinions I really care about. That's a social threat. And your adrenaline's going to kick up and your higher functioning brain can't really cope until it feels safe. The last thing I'll say about the lizard is its reaction to threat is much stronger than its reaction to reward. We all have that feeling of, ooh, that was tasty food. I want to eat more of that. And that's part of your limbic brain coming in and saying like, ooh, that'll keep you fat and happy. Let's eat more of that. But that response is much milder than the response to, ow, hot stove. I don't want to touch that again. All right. The response that we have is to move away from threat much faster than we move towards reward. So how do we speak to this lizard? How do we engage the team and make them understand that they are safe and there is social and emotional safety? First, you have to understand the 5 domains of social threat. Okay, in humans, we care about status. We care about knowing where we sit in our group and where our group sits in the larger group. We care about certainty. We want to know where we are, where we're going, what's the path to get there. Autonomy, everyone wants to feel like they're in control of their own work and like they're trusted to do what they've been asked to do. Relatedness is about how we connect to our group. And that's going to come up later as another important animal all on its own. And of course, fairness, all right? Even small animals and small children can tell you what's fair and what's not. And once you have identified those areas of social risk that exist in your organization and even just in your group, you as a leader need to find ways to reduce those feelings of social risk and then actively increase the feelings of reward. And at the beginning, you want to pay more attention to the risk, as I mentioned before. You're going to need to create an environment that's psychologically safe and encourages vulnerability. Vulnerability means that you can take risks and that you can be honest about when you made a mistake. And you don't get to that great space of risk taking and innovation without being able to try something new and different and fail, and then tell your leader or your boss that you've failed. And the number one way that you can encourage vulnerability as a leader is to model vulnerability, which means not oversharing, but it means being candid. It means being honest about what you're doing and why you're doing it. It means admitting when you've made a mistake or admitting when you don't know something, really leading from this empathetic place rather than from a place of fear. And finally, you need to regularly practice these small everyday behaviors that foster trust. Trust happens in really small ways. You don't just get to walk in and say, hey, I'm your leader, I'm your boss, you have to trust me. It is in establishing and maintaining boundaries. It is in being reliable and accountable and regularly, consistently producing those behaviors that foster trust between you and your team and make them feel safe. So now that this lizard brain is feeling safe, now higher order thinking can come along. And that's where the next animal comes in. So the next one we're talking about is the elephant. Now, this analogy comes to me from Jonathan Haidt. He's a moral psychologist. His work focuses on why people, individuals, and cultures and societies make the moral choices that they do. And his research and that of his colleagues has shown that we often think of our brains as making rational choices and then our emotions kind of come along beside it. But it's really backwards to what really happens according to his research. People are making decisions based on intuitions and emotional gut feelings, and reason comes in afterwards to justify it. So he describes the way this works in the brain is the elephant and the rider. The elephant is our emotional, intuitive reasoning. So this is no longer limbic brain survival thinking, but this is the product of our life, where we grew up, what schools we went to, what culture we were raised in, what companies we've worked for, teams we've played for. All of those things come together to make us who we are and give us the intuitive, emotional reasoning, if you want to call it that, and those reactions to the things around us. And then the elephant is this big thing that moves fast. So when something happens, you'll often find you have a very quick reaction to it. And then your rider on top is the reasoning brain that comes in afterwards and justifies it. It says, oh, well, this is the reason why I did this thing. And Haidt is quick to point out that elephants are big and they move fast. So emotional and intuitive reactions happen quickly. You have to be aware of that. And there isn't a lot of room for riders or reasoning to come and pull them back once those intuitive emotional reactions have happened. So the elephant is going to show up when you're convincing people, when you have to make a pitch, when you have to sell something. It's going to show up in conflict resolution when you're talking through difficult conversations with your team. And how you want to talk to the elephant is, number one, create an emotional connection to the work you're doing. No matter what work it is that you're doing, there is a person on the other end that's going to benefit from it. And no matter how far you are away from that end delivery, you need to tell that story. You need to get your team connected to the emotional and story of how you're producing real value for real people. Because when you come up against difficult times and difficult situations, that emotional connection is going to lead to good intuitions and good reactions to challenging times. Secondly, I highlight this because it comes up in conflict resolution and difficult conversations that intuitive reactions override logical ones almost every time. And this means that if you're having a conversation with someone where they really seem to be digging in their heels from your perspective, or maybe you're digging in your heels and no amount of the other person's perspective is swaying you, more reason isn't the answer. You need to get to a place where you can ask questions, model curiosity, and try to understand those intuitive and emotional reactions and get yourselves on the same page. And when you're asking those questions, you want to avoid why questions, because why questions are a great way to back people into a corner and make them feel defensive. You ideally want to work in favor of how and what and when. Finally, I'll say, remember that this rider is coming in post hoc to justify emotional and intuitive reasoning. So you're telling yourself a story, and sometimes that story isn't exactly accurate. So always ask yourself, what is the story you're telling yourself? And how is it different, or could it be different from the story that your team is telling themselves? So the last animal I'm going to talk about are the bees. Bees in nature are really cool. They're superorganisms, and superorganisms, you can also find them in ant colonies, termites are other examples, and they are creatures where individuals will make decisions that don't necessarily make sense from an evolutionary perspective for that individual, but they make sense for the whole organism, for the hive. These creatures are working for collective goals and collective benefit. And Jonathan Haidt, again, another one of his books, he talks about how human beings are 90% chimp and 10% bee. So what he means by this is we're mostly primates, right? We live in groups, yes, but we care mostly about individual survival and the survival of our particular offspring. But then we have this thing that he likes to call a hive switch, and it's a thing in our brains. Psychology has shown that in the right circumstances, human beings can have this hive switch triggered, and we start behaving more like we care about the collective goals and the collective benefits instead of just our individual goals and our individual benefit. And the places where this shows up in human society, you could probably guess there's things like political affiliation or religious affiliation. But psychology research has also shown really interestingly that companies and corporations can be superorganisms in human culture, and that in the right circumstances with the right psychological safety, you can trigger that hive switch and get this real connectivity and inclusion. And I'll call out here using that word that if you're doing any work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is the inclusion part of that program. Your HR and talent team could be doing a great job bringing in a really diverse team of people and retaining them and promoting them. But if you're not actively creating an environment where everyone feels genuinely included and part of the same hive, that is going to fall apart very quickly. So how do we speak to these bees? The number one thing that you can do is give your team a clear set of shared values. This has to go way beyond a mission statement. You have to clearly outline these are our values. This is what we believe and what we do. If you think about it, this shows up for humans in politics and religious affiliation because claiming that you belong to one of those groups says that you belong to a clear set of shared values. So that's really important for establishing this hive mind. As a leader, you need to behave with absolute transparency and fairness. This does not mean that everyone's going to love your decisions all the time. That's impossible. But if you can be very transparent about your process and you can be fair in your outcome, your hive will continue to coalesce around that behavior. Human beings are wired for language. We're wired for communication. So it's really important that we use group language, and especially we over I is a really good trigger to bring people together. And finally, you do fun things together as a group. Now, this might sound like I'm inviting you to expense your beer night, and I'm not going to tell you not to do that. But what I mean here is when we bring people together, just celebrate events in our lives, have a baby shower for someone in the group, or celebrate a milestone birthday, or go out after an on-site. You're doing fun things together and you're bonding in a social way that is critical for bringing people together and creating this hive mindset that triggers that switch and gets people caring about those collective goals and collective benefits more than they would otherwise. So that's an awful lot in a short period of time. So I'll sum up here. People are happier when they feel safe, emotionally connected, and like they're part of something bigger than ourselves. Now, this is an active practice of leadership, and sometimes, I will be candid, it's counterintuitive, especially for women who, as they go up in their career, are often coached to be less emotional and less vulnerable and less candid. So you're going to feel like it's a little bit of a push and pull in yourself practicing this leadership style. But I promise you, the research is 100% behind this, that if you can create an environment of psychological safety where people feel genuinely safe and there is a real drive towards genuine inclusion, then you will create a team that's primed for success, where success is creativity, innovation, risk-taking, and productivity. And thank you all so much for your time.